Welcome, everyone. Before we get rolling with today's discussion, I want to announce several things, actually. I'll announce our next two climate conversations and a third different one. So the next one, July 22nd, we like to mix these things up a lot. So different topics, bring different people. Our next one, and the next two actually will be out, we'll have a big tent out in front. The next speaker will be Conrad Anker. Conrad is a climber, a legendary mountain climber. He's the, I guess, the captain of the North Face athlete team. He's been on the top of the biggest mountains around the world, and that's not why we have him here. Although that's what, in part that's why we have him here. He's kind of this amazing guy that's done amazing things, but he thinks an awful lot about our planet. He's seen a lot of our planet and how it's changing. He thinks about climate change, and he tries to use his voice, which is a considerable following, to get things pointed in a better direction. So we're happy to partner with him on those things. So spread the word. We're also going to announce that that climate conversation to different audiences. So we'll see if we can attract some different people to come to listen to that conversation. So that's July 22nd. July 23rd, we will have our first of the Woodwell Climate Conversations on the road. So that one will be on Nantucket, the evening of July 23rd, and it will be in collaboration with the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. So if you want to tour around, hop on the ferry, join me on the ferry and spend a little time on Nantucket. And then the third one to announce is August 11th, back here at Woodwell, and it will be Joe Kennedy. So that is Joseph P. Kennedy III, who is on our board here, and a remarkable person, remarkable speaker, and so on. So that will also be, I'm sure, a very interesting conversation. Those of you who carefully read the announcements about these things will, if you got to the bottom of it, you'll see that we said something about if we get 100 new people in, we sort of put this challenge out when we restarted after the winter, so maybe a few months ago, and if we get 100 new people in the door by June, which is June now, that we will donate $2,000 to a local charity or charities. And I'm really disappointed because we've got to pay up. So damn it. But we've decided, and this is hot off the presses, that we'll split it. $1,000 will go to the Island Grown Initiative. And $1,000 will go to Farming Falmouth. And this is really all just to get you in the mood to give money. Like, see how easy it's fun. It's really fun to support good organizations. So no, fantastic organizations. We're really proud to help them do the amazing work that they do, and we're going to learn a lot more about that in a few minutes. I have one more exciting, hot off the press announcement that is relevant for tonight's conversation. I don't even think Chris knows about this, but we have until today, we've had 3 endowed chairs at Woodwell. We have the Woodwell chair, we have the Houghton chair, and we have the Brown chair. And as of today, I got the paperwork for a 4th one. It won't be activated for a little while, but we will have the 4th chair, which will be the Reagan Family Chair in regenerative agriculture. So, yeah. So
better find somebody to do that.
Yeah. So lots of good news all around. All right. To today's conversation, the title of which is Beyond Buying Local, Rethinking Food Systems for Climate and Community. And many of you, if you were here a month ago, you'll recognize we're on a bit of an ag kick. And last month we had 2 Woodwell scientists, and we were talking about a very different sort of scale of agriculture. They're both from Brazil. We're talking about large-scale agriculture in Brazil and why that's super important and how it interacts with deforestation and all those kinds of things. Today it will be a different scale of conversation, and I'm super excited. We have Noli Taylor with us, who is the co-executive director of the Island Grown Initiative, and they just got a big windfall of support from Andrew Woodruff, who's a consultant, a regenerative ag consultant with the Island Grown Initiative, and a farmer. So he's the guy who really knows how to do this stuff. And Dr. Chris Neil, senior scientist here, who's very much involved in this sort of work and lots of other work. So I want to just start by, maybe we can just kind of go down the road, but have you introduce yourselves a little bit more and kind of, in a couple of minutes, tell your life story about how you ended up sitting on a stool in front of an audience at Woodwell Climate Research Center.
I guess I'm starting. Well, I'm going to make this really, well, I'm start by saying that if you told me 12 years ago that I'd be sitting in front of, at the Woodwell Institute presenting, I would have said, first of all, I would have said, what is regenerative agriculture? And there's a caution to that. But, and the other is that, yeah, I think you're crazy. And so here I am, and I'm really glad I've had two chapters of my life. I've had a pre-regenerative and sort of a very deep into regenerative farming one now. And I'm very fortunate. But I started out farming at a really young age of technically, I guess, 16 on the vineyard. I ran a really large CSA wholesale vegetable operation on 30 acres for about 35 years. In 2015, life being what life is, started to change. Body was wearing out, bills were stacking up. Decided I wanted to kind of rethink how I wanted to farm. Wanted to do some small scale agriculture, intensive organic. But then I started learning about regenerative farming. And I was, at the time, farming at the Island Grown Farm, leasing some land from them. But by 2018, I was kind of done. I was just kind of spent running my own business, but I was really getting into the principles of regenerative agriculture. So Noe and I started a conversation, and we decided that we would start a little model, small 2-acre regenerative pilot program on the farm. And from there, 2020 hit. We all know what happened then. Suddenly there was concerns about food insecurity. We ramped it up and took over the whole 15 acres and came up with a design to implement regenerative agriculture on the farm. And yeah, I've had a really long history of farming, and I'm really excited to be here and share more about that.
Is this working? Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. It is so wonderful to be in a crowded room of people who want to talk about climate and regenerative agriculture. I'm so glad we're all here together to talk about this tonight. Okay, my life story in 2 minutes. So I'm from Northern California originally, and I come from a long line of community organizers and activists. And when I was little, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a big grape boycott going on in California. And my mom would bring my sister and I out with our picket signs, and we would join the farm workers, advocating for better rights for farm workers and no more terrible toxic pesticides on our grapes. And that was kind of my first foray into agricultural activism when I was like 5, 4. And now here we are all these years later. In my early 20s, I moved to Hawaii, to the island of Kauai, and was living on the North Shore and learned about the amount of agricultural genetic engineering happening, experimental agricultural genetic engineering happening on our beautiful island, and got really involved with community organizing, first on Kauai and then on all of our neighbor islands, working for food sovereignty and safety for people, especially Native Hawaiian communities around heavy pesticide applications. So it was really a lot of battling the big Monsanto and Dow and DuPont and Syngenta. And it was such amazing, powerful work that goes on there to this day. I was also working at a coffee shop, because when you're an activist, you have to also work at a coffee shop. And there I met Isaac Taylor, who's now my husband, whose family has been on Martha's Vineyard for about 400 years. And so I ended up moving out to the vineyard to be with Isaac. And I got to the island and just thought, oh my gosh, this place is so special. There was no corporate presence there. There's, you know, town meeting and direct democracy, and it just felt like, wow, we could spend all of our energy here building something wonderful. And there was so much pride in the community about the agricultural history of the island and the ongoing preservation of farmland for families. And so I got involved with what was then a brand new community group called the Island Grown Initiative, small volunteer effort to try and figure out how to support local food and farming on the vineyard. And That was 20 years ago. And I've been with Island Grown ever since then. And now our work really spans the sweep of our local food system, food production, which we're going to talk more about tonight, food distribution. We also run our island food pantry, food education. We run farm to school programs in every school on the island. And we really think holistically about what community food security means in a time of climate change. So regenerative agriculture is such an important part of that. So and Andrew and I love to talk about it. So we're so glad to get to be here with you all tonight.
Well, those are awfully hard to follow. I got interested in farming. My dad had a vegetable garden. That was simple, right? But on the academic side, I did my PhD in southern Manitoba at the interface between natural ecosystems of the Delta Marsh on the shore of Lake Manitoba and extensive farmland in southern Manitoba, which is some of the best farmland on earth. And there was this contested middle ground of land that wasn't quite fully marsh and wasn't quite fully farming. And that's where I did my PhD work on the role of water level change in controlling the growth of these marsh grasses in that seasonal environment. And we used to have field days with the local farm association there, and we'd go out and listen to them talk about, well, why they wanted to farm that land or the problems they were having, and we would talk about the wildlife end of things. It was a huge area for production of waterfowl, ducks of all kinds. And I remember sitting in one farm field, and so I got interested in like the problems these farmers face, because I was in my late 20s then. And some of these farmers were my age, and it's like they're making decisions about having to spray and spend $20,000 tomorrow, and maybe it's going to rain and I'm screwed, or maybe it's going to work. And I remember sitting in one field, a quarter section, it was 160 acres of carrots, and the farmer said, "Well, that's enough carrots to supply Calgary to Thunder Bay, Ontario." And I thought, man, how do you figure out this system in this context, where it's all going to Campbell Food Company? And I kept thinking, there are different ways of thinking about this. And so that was my eye-opening experience into why we should care about how farmland works as well as how natural lands work. And I've since worked in Brazil on farming, and I've seen more interfaces, but I'm still very interested in that. The science around that interface and what are the impacts of farming and how can we reduce them? So that's part of my mission in science here.
So let's stay with you for a minute, Chris, and if you can talk a little bit about why are we talking about ag at the Woodwell Climate Research Center?
Yeah, well, it's between cropland and pasture land, it's more than a third of the Earth's terrestrial surface. So it's a huge area that's impacted and under direct human control. And there are all kinds of impacts associated with that, with farming activity. And a lot of them are related to climate, the deforestation of lands to make new agricultural lands. Greenhouse gas emissions from farming are not insignificant. While the direct CO2 emitted from farms is a few percent, the whole supply chain and the distribution of food and the trucking and the making of fertilizer and all that stuff add up to more than 15% of national energy and almost a little bit less globally, but about that much of energy. So it's a big piece of the energy and climate pie in that sense. And then there are all the sort of climate, the emissions of greenhouse gases directly from soils. The loss of soil carbon is a huge issue sort of globally, especially with intensive farming. So you add all those things up, one of the most potent greenhouse gas of the top three, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, is nitrous oxide. It's released as part of the nitrogen cycle in soil, but 80% of global emissions come from agriculture for that greenhouse. And it's 250 times as powerful per molecule in heat trapping as carbon dioxide, and it lives in the atmosphere for a long time. So there are a whole bunch of impacts. So reducing that is a major thing. We study that in the Amazon. We're interested in studying it here in relation to to how practices could be rather than kind of how they are today.
So in a little bit, we'll open it up to questions from the audience, but I want to get you warmed up with a little bit of participation first. So raise your hand if before tonight you had heard of regenerative agriculture. Okay, so most hands are up. Keep your hand up if you have a clear understanding of what it is. No, nobody confidently kept it up, myself included. So, all right, we've got people who can help explain. Noah, you want to start with that one, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Sure, yes, I can do the broad strokes, but these are the true pros here. So the concept of regenerative agriculture is food production that contributes to thriving of life instead of degradation of life, as Chris is mentioning. That's not how food was always produced, and that's not how food has been produced in traditional cultures for much of history. Actually, food production can lead to mutual thriving of people and place, and that's the kind of big picture concept behind regenerative agriculture, which really focuses first on the health of the soil as the fundamental component of how we can create this kind of thriving environment through food production. And Andrew can talk about the specifics about how we think about it.
Sure. I want to also just mention that regenerative agriculture is not a legal definition. It's not like organic. It's controversial amongst certain groups. So people have different ideas about what it is. That was a great question, Max, or to the audience. In my mind, it starts with a change of the heart for most farmers. It's a opportunity to reconnect with these biological systems and natural systems that we indigenous people have practiced for generations. And there are a set of principles that are often followed. We want to reduce disturbance of the soil to minimize damage to the fungal networks and other things. We try to keep the soil covered with natural materials at all times when we can. We integrate animal livestock when we can. That's a huge thing that we do at IGI, and it's had profound changes in our soil. Diversity, you want plant diversity on your farm. It's really important. Diversity is really what we are lacking in modern agriculture. And this really ties into the biological systems of the soil, and it can go on off on a tangent on nutrient density and the food we eat and food as medicine and blah, blah, blah. So there are a set of principles.
That seems like a good tangent to go on, but
well, you have to be an expert. I'm not an expert on that one, but
maybe talk a little bit more about just sort of what the changes are that you've implemented at the farm and what you've observed.
Yeah, maybe I could start because one of the things that I think is so hopeful about what we've seen at our farm is that when IGI was gifted the farm in 2012, it was in a state of depletion. The soil was in poor condition. We had a lot of perennial weed pressure. Biodiversity had really plummeted in the area. And that's the state of so much of our farmland now in this country. And so we were starting in a position that wasn't great. And the speed at which we've seen change in the land once Andrew and our farm team started implementing regenerative principles is just the most hopeful climate thing that I have ever seen. Because Andrew can do the details, but really within one growing season, things were changing. Within 2 growing seasons, the results were really, really meaningfully visible. So we went from, I always think about this one plot that Andrew was growing carrots in from the first year. And he brought me out the first year that he was doing these regenerative experiments and would dig into the soil, and it was like hard packed, powdery, like light khaki, just there was nothing to it. And 2 seasons later, we were standing in the very same spot, and the soil was getting dark and more like chocolate cake, and there's what they call aggregation. It was sticking together. This was happening fast, and through using practices that aren't terribly complicated or terribly expensive to implement within just a couple of years, and now we're 6 years into this really being a broad experiment on our farm. We are seeing dramatic change in insect life, in soil quality, in what you see in the roots of the plants that you dig up, in the health and vigor of the plants that we're growing. We also donate about half of what we grow, between a third and a half, to community members facing food insecurity, and making sure that we're still producing abundant food on this land while implementing these practices is really important to us, and that's happening. So it's just really incredible, and I hope you'll all come and visit the farm. And Andrew can talk more about the specifics about our practices and also what you're seeing.
Sure. What's that?
Do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about actually what causes these changes.
Yeah. So
what are you doing that gets you there?
well, when we started this project, first of all, I want to acknowledge something. I farmed that land for 8 years prior to IGI taking it over, and I was a heavy tiller. I was growing organically, but I was tilling a lot. Prior to me farming the land, it had been in conventional ag, and it had been sprayed for berries, strawberries, every fungicide and chemical you can imagine on the planet. And prior to that, it had been in corn silage, which is one of the worst things you can do to a piece of land. Very extractive. So when we took over, and started brainstorming this restoration, I realized I had a really good idea how bad things were, and had a kind of a vision for what we could do to fix it. So we started with some heavy tillage equipment to do deep subsurface tillage to break up hard pan from years of tractors going over the land. And each year we used less invasive, less intensive tillage equipment, and we came up with a rotational system where a third of the land or more, 40% of the land, went back into pasture, and we started grazing animals, sheep and chickens, pigs, goats. We had them all. Now we're down to just sheep and chickens because the pigs got loose and the goats, and the land bank's 180 goats got loose one day. I won't even tell you about that. And so, I mean, first of all, we created a plan. We had 34 blocks, and we came up with 3 rotations in 5 years, 2 years in pasture, 3 years in cash crops, and we just started implementing these things. And each year, we were finding the soil getting better aggregated, and we were having to use less intensive tillage equipment. And we started designing equipment. We modified equipment, and so it's been this really amazing journey for the last 6 years of just seeing how far we can push this. And it is a lot more detail, but I'll stop there.
I mean, we also transformed 3 million pounds of food waste into compost on our farm and applied that all to our fields. That was a big booster. Cover crops, really diverse cover crops in the rotation with cash crops, or just feeding that soil biology with photosynthetic energy. I mean, so there's some simple practices: reducing tillage, animals in the rotation, living roots in the ground as much as possible, no chemicals, no synthetic chemicals. So some simple practices that really paid off so rapidly.
All that simple, huh?
For me, it was really simple. I got to go be like, this is amazing. And Andrew and the farm crew were working
I
really
had one
hard.
quick thing. This year, what we're experimenting more with is we're putting living walkways and tractor aisles planting. So if you were to come out to the farm, and we're undersowing cover crops in cash crops. So if you come out to the farm, there is basically no bare ground anywhere on the farm for more than a few days or a week at any time.
Yes. So one of the things that excites me is we scientists who study these things could potentially use this as an example, because there isn't a lot of data on how much carbon is this farming practice actually putting back into the soil. How permanent is that carbon? Is it going to last 2 years or 100 years? I think a lot about losses of nutrients from landscapes, suburban landscapes and agricultural landscapes. Agricultural landscapes globally, nationally, locally are a big source of nutrients to groundwaters and surface waters. And so those are associated with application of inorganic fertilizers often, but they're often just a function of ramping up the nutrient cycle. So there's no absolute guarantee that these losses are lower. There's some reasons we think they're lower, but because the inputs are matched very closely, the decomposition of those cover crop organic matter derived, that material is then sort of released slowly at the rate at which plants are then taking it back up. So we think the nutrient cycle is closing, and you're doing a great job of that. But there's still some unknowns. And what are the greenhouse gas emissions, and can we quantify all these benefits in ways that we can do with the tools we have now? So we're thinking of that angle to this as well.
I was just thinking about, I guess it was 2 years ago. We have 3 board meetings a year. The June board meeting is always here in Woods Hole. And 2 years ago, we took an excursion, hopped on the ferry, took the board over, went to the farm, and Andrew was there, and I'll never forget. I don't remember what the plant you held up, but it was some plant, and I've never seen anybody so enthusiastic with such a wonderful smile, pointing out the dirt clumped on the roots,
Soil, Max, soil.
Yeah, soil. My God. Yeah.
It was rhizosheath.
Right. God, who's the scientist here? Come on. Right. But I remember at that time, like, we were just so enthusiastic about the possibility of what Chris was just like, we need to work together. And it hasn't happened yet, but let's get re-enthused about that and commit to figuring out a way to do so. Because, yeah, studying what you're doing and actually getting the data to be able to define exactly the results in lots of different variables, I think is important for lots of different reasons, including how do you scale this thing? And I mean, maybe I'll ask that question, are other farmers seeing what you're doing and following suit?
Shall I? Well, I got a call recently, or a text message recently, saying that someone would never do a certain practice again based on what I had told them, that, something that would work. And it's actually, we to be straight up, it was really not it was sort of a soil health thing, but the broader question is that we are working with a whole group of farmers around New England through various organizations, through American Farmland Trust, an organization called Momentum Ag. Last winter, we had our first reduced tillage meeting. It was sort of a private invite for people that are really interested in reducing tillage. There were about 40 farmers, and it was a 2-day event sponsored by AFT and Momentum Ag. So we think there's a lot of opportunity, but the problem is that the farmers have to pay their bills. There's a lot of risk in making these changes. I've been blessed to work for a nonprofit now. But there's a strong interest and people are doing it. But at tractor scale, it's a lot trickier than your 2 or 3 acre intensive organic deep mulch system. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that this kind of farmer to farmer peer information sharing is really critical for these kinds of practices to be able to spread. And Andrew's 40 years of farming before he even started doing regenerative agriculture, really is informing his experience of seeing the transition and what's possible when you start farming a different way. But that's risky for a for-profit farm to change. And that's hard for people in general, to make a change from what you're familiar with. And that's why as a nonprofit farm, we have more freedom to experiment with things that might be too scary or too much of a risk for more conventional farmers. And we're really committed to sharing everything we're learning as widely as we can. So being in this reduced tillage cohort from American Farmland Trust was really wonderful. Lincoln from Momentum Ag has been sharing the work that Tim and the farm crew have been doing all across the country and beyond. Andrew is being humble, but he also recently won a special award for a piece of equipment that he developed that allows for cash crops, like vegetable crops, to be planted right into living clover mulch, living mulches, so that you can keep that photosynthetic energy feeding soil biology, but also be growing food for people to eat. It's a really wonderful tool that now farmers around New England and beyond are starting to replicate. All of this is as open source as we can possibly make it. Like, here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing. And Andrew's farmer voice to other farmers, I think, is a really critical part of getting farmers to feel like this is something that they could do.
I'll ask one more question and then we'll open it up. But could you speak a little bit about how the farm is integrated or connected to the local community?
Yeah, so because Island Grown is involved in so many different parts of our food system, we're able to really work with a lot of different people and bring them to the farm. So our Farm to School program is 19 years old now. We've raised an entire generation of kids with school gardens and with local food in their cafeterias. But it's hard for a lot of farms to host field trips because they're busy farming. And now that we have our farm, we bring between 1/3 and 1/2 of the kids of the island to the farm every year for field trips. A lot of what they do is gleaning. They harvest for donation to their own school cafeterias or to our food pantry or other partners. They come and they study soil life. That's a curricular standard in 5th grade. So it's kids from preschool all the way through high school who are coming to our farm, and they're all starting to see that this is what a farm looks like. Like this has become normal, that you have cover crops all the time, and that there's animals and grains and vegetables, and that there's volunteers. We have hundreds of people who come and volunteer to glean and harvest for donation, and we have a community garden on the farm, and we also have been implementing a pollination plan on the farm for the last 4 years. So every farm has areas that aren't really well suited for vegetable production or crop production. Maybe it's too wet or it's too shady, but you can often integrate pollinator species into those areas and support biodiversity on the land. And we're seeing really amazing changes by doing that on our farm. So we bring all these children to see our farm, and now they're seeing that this is what farming is, and that's really powerful to us. We also share our food with about 1 in 5 of the members of our year-round community who face food insecurity, so they're experiencing the food that's being grown in these regenerative fields as part of their health and wellness, and that's really meaningful to us. We just try and bring as many people as we can to the farm. We do farm tours in the summer. We invite island farmers to come and check out what we're doing. So the more that we can bring people to see this in person, the better we feel.
If you can't tell, Noli didn't sleep for about 20 years. She makes me tired when I think about all that.
But I think these farm-to-farm networks are the way information spreads in farm communities. I mean, I've seen this every place that I've worked, and having a science piece to it, I think would be a cool addition where we could show the data as well as the sort of pictures and hold the soil in your hands. I think that would be a very powerful way to add to the conversation about how important this is and how it should spread.
That's right, because farmers hearing from other farmers is critical, but also seeing the data that this makes meaningful change, and this is the change that it makes. And also for policymakers, because we do need some investment to support for-profit farms in making this transition. It's worth an investment, but we need data to back that up, and that's why we are very hopeful that we'll be able to do more partnering with Woodwell. We happen to have like the top climate scientists in the world right here, and we'd love to be able to utilize their brain power to help measure the changes that we're seeing on the farm so we can really spread that to other farm communities and to policymakers.
And yeah, just real briefly, I think there's something like a 90% or more retention rate when people convert to regenerative ag. Once you get on this journey, there's no looking back. There's no going back. I wished I could start again in my 20s with the wisdom and knowledge I have now, but I'm super grateful for this opportunity. And the other thing I was going to say is, sorry, what were you just saying? No.
About data.
Oh, data. Oh, science. Yeah, sorry. I had to. Yeah, sorry. When we started this project, I'm very tired. I've been up since 4. Sorry. When we started this project, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and it was only because things were changing so rapidly and going not always perfectly, but really going pretty well, that we steadily started to realize like we have something special happening here. And that's when we started thinking about, wow, Woodwell, they're just across the water here, like, and just, the wheels started turning a lot more and a lot faster.
All right, so we'll open it up to questions. Please wait until a microphone gets to you so the online people can hear. Let's start here, and then we'll go in the back, and then. All right.
Well, as many of you know, I'm on the board of Farming Falmouth, and so are several other people here tonight. Ellie, would you stand up? Jean, I think you're also here. And our executive director, Jessica. And I think on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you very, very much. Very touched about your award to us tonight. I'm super interested in your using clover, I'm assuming white clover, as a cover crop, and then just crimping it or making a little space and planting into it. A lot of people might think, oh, you're growing other plants around your crops, and that's going to rob them of nitrogen, but white clover is a nitrogen fixer. Have you actually had a chance to measure how that cycle works, what you're gaining and what you're losing?
We've done some measurement, but it's not scientific, really, up at the scale. The clover experiment is something I would caution anybody doing it at scale, but we're seeing results. And the reason why we are seeing results, I believe, is because we've been implementing regenerative practices for 6 years now, and the soil cycling and the nutrient cycling and the health of our soil overall is able to feed more than just clover. It can feed the tomato plant too, or our broccoli or brassicas. So it's really about having good baseline soil health that I think when you can start to do these practices that might seem completely crazy otherwise.
Thank you.
Let's go, Joan, and then we'll get one in the back, and then we'll hop back up here.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that when you talk about scaling, that you include scaling down as well as scaling up. And particularly, I think about how we live if we are gardening at small scale and how that impacts the design of our neighborhoods and our composting facilities and young muscle to help aging muscle and all that stuff.
That is a really important point. We brought a little handout, top regenerative backyard gardening tips. That's another way that we engage our community in regenerative agriculture, is that these kinds of practices can be done on many scales. Home scale is really important. And our friends in Orange, Mass run a group called Seeds of Solidarity, and their expression is grow food everywhere. And when we think about living through the time of climate transition that we're in, we really need food security to begin at home, and we need a lot more people engaged in food production. And there's practices that we can use in our backyards that help produce food in ways that are more resilient to our unpredictable weather, and that, sequester some kind of greenhouse gases. And just one more point on scale. So there's the home scale. We know a number of regenerative farms that are kind of hand scale, so an acre or less. Andrew and our farm team are doing something pretty unusual on this kind of tractor scale. It's not 1,000 acres. That's also happening. Regenerative agriculture thought of in a different way around grazing lands and things like that on a much larger scale. But our kind of mid-scale organic regenerative food production that's happening at our farm isn't happening that much yet. And that's why these kinds of systems and tools that the farm crew are developing, I think, are of such value, because it's farms kind of like this, 20 acres to 100 acres that feed communities. And so getting these kinds of practices on farms like this feels really meaningful.
Yeah, and one of the main emitters of carbon dioxide is transporting all this stuff around. And so, lessening that transport and growing food close to home. And so that would be part of what we would love to be able to do, is calculate the total carbon footprint of the whole operation and take into account, well, what would the emissions be if you weren't producing this food locally and you had to import it? And so that's why one of the reasons I like talking to these folks is because they think holistically like that. And I'm trained as a systems ecologist, and Woodwell has been famous for its systems ecology. So I think this fits really nicely in that framework. But so we could quantify all those things, as well as the food quality and as well as the yields that you get with these different practices. So it's not just me doing biogeochemistry on emissions. It's like, how much are you actually improving yields? So that's the integrated way of looking at it, which I think is really, really cool.
Biogeochemistry on emissions also sounds really great. Let's do that too.
Thank you.
Let's go to the back.
Hey, so I'll start with the premise that I think a lot of regenerative practices are like unambiguously good, like reducing tillage and cover cropping and stuff. But like a criticism you hear from Monsanto or other folks like that would be any practice on a global scale that reduces yield will drive land use change to meet total demand. And that would have an overall more negative impact on biodiversity or whatever if you're clearing, say, rainforest. I think it's overly simplistic, but what would be your response to like those sort of criticisms of anything that might limit yield in the name of better practices?
It's, first of all, a great question, and an important question, and I too am curious to hear the answer.
It's a little over my head. It's like sitting out on a starry night, looking up there, saying, you know, how is this possible? I was once told by famous Elliot Coleman that you need to think locally, not think locally, act global. I'm so tired. You know what I mean. Think locally, act globally. I think there's concerns there, but I don't see this plant. One of the big issues here is that we're not accounting for the cost of this large-scale agriculture and what it's doing to our environment and our human health. So there's so many different ways of looking at this. The path that we're continuing on is not sustainable. It is going to just destroy us as human beings in the next 150, 200 years. So I don't think we have a choice. And I think any step towards doing some regenerative practices eventually will get you to a place. I don't know. Like I said before, I know few regenerative farmers that would ever go back. So my answer is that we can have our cake and eat it too.
I mean, one of the biggest drivers of expansion of agriculture is for production of protein that goes to feed animals. So where we eat on the food chain is actually the biggest driver of the land area needed, and the water and the energy. And as the world gets more wealthy and eats more meat, that demand for the grains that go to feed cows and chickens and pigs goes up. And so part of the solution really is eating more plants. But as Michael Pollan said, you know, eat plants and less food maybe overall for most Americans. And that has to be factored into this equation, I think, in terms of thinking about what land area is required for agriculture globally. I'm a big, you know, a lot of the assessments of like how we use natural climate solutions on Earth don't even consider the idea that we would take farmland out of production, because we're saying, well, no, we're going to do this analysis, and we've done that. Our folks have done that here, and say that we're just going to talk about changing farmland, changing land that isn't farmland, wastelands or maybe some degraded pastures. We're not going to touch farmland. We need to think about touching farmland and doing more intensive farming on smaller acres, and I think that's much more of a solution than sort of, you know, expanding the pharmacopoeia that gets put on farmland globally.
And yields end up going down when soil health is tanking. You know, when you use toxic chemicals and do heavy tillage for many years, you just are on the gerbil wheel of needing more inputs, you know, more chemical fertilizers, more herbicides. Like, that is not actually working. And I feel like that message from chemical companies that we have to stick with more and more fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides to feed the world is just an outgrowth of kind of a capitalist mentality that is also a product of human disconnection to the rest of the living world. Like, it's not that we're just poisoning the crops, we're also poisoning all the life around the crops, and it's not like that's not related to human life, you know. So that's, I just feel like that argument always just makes me be like, oh no, this is a symptom of so many problems. And also there's the food waste issue. 30 to 40% of the food grown in this country is never eaten. So figuring out how to reduce food waste and actually really value the food that's grown and make sure we're not wasting it. I think your point about gardening kind of speaks to that. When you grow food yourself, you see it's really hard to grow food and you don't want to waste it. It's precious and it requires so many resources that we just have to redirect the whole way that we're thinking about how we grow, transport, and throw away food, because it's not that we don't have enough. It's just that we aren't utilizing it in the most effective and respectful way.
One thing that made a big impression on me, this was a year, maybe 2 years ago in the Amazon at Tanguru Ranch, where Woodwell scientists and other scientists have worked for a long time. And it's sort of at the area of agricultural expansion. So I think if you went there 50 years ago, it was intact canopy as far as the eye can see, and much farther than that. And now it's been carved up. There's still forest left, but there's, you know, very large scale agriculture. You get in the forest, you still see, you know, monkeys in the trees. It's still this amazing place. And as we were flying out, not too far from the ranch, there was this area that had been cleared and was being burned. And I mean, that was kind of a gut punch, in particularly because it's, as far as the eye could see there, you don't see any food that is ever going to go into a person's mouth. You know, it's all, this is back to the diet issue. It's all to feed the animals that eventually that we consume. So yeah, diet's a big part of the equation. And I mean, I say this not as a vegetarian, but somebody who tries to eat lower on the food chain, recognizing that it's an important variable in what happens around the world, and you know, how we use what we eat matters for how much land we need to produce that food.
Back to the ecosystem impact question or conundrum. I'm hoping that the answer is the one that I'm expecting, but when you do regenerative farming, is there less water required? Is there an impact where we're going to accomplish good things to prevent drought? What's the ecosystem impact beyond just the food and the produce and the productivity?
Well, I would say for sure, in terms of water holding capacity, 1% of carbon could be equal to 20,000, 30,000 gallons of water per acre. So if you can increase your carbon by, you know, 2 or 3%. So, yeah. Well, I mean, I've always said it, back to the gentleman's question back in the back there, if you don't have healthy soils, you can't retain water. And so at some point, when this water issue really comes to head, there are many farmers that are switching to regenerative practices because for no more other reason, not because they believe in climate change, but because the water issue. So that's my short answer to that one.
Yeah, we see in the region of the Amazon where a bunch of us at Woodwell work is that farmers made huge investments in double cropping, following a soybean crop with a corn crop or a cotton crop. You know, 2 days after they harvest, they plant another crop, and they get 2 crops in a rainy season. And but they're backing off of that because it's gotten drier, and they're having a harder time. There's just more drought stress, and it's compounded by the fact that these soils are sort of sit fallow and have lower organic matter now than they did, you know, when they were first put into agriculture.
I also think on the water issue, when soil is healthier, when you have cover on the land, when there's periods of drought or periods of heavy rainfall, it's just much more stable. And we've seen it on our own farm. You know, in some times that we've been integrating our regenerative practices, there'll be areas that have cover crops and areas that had moments of bareness. And when all of a sudden it rains really hard, you can just see it with your own eyes. Look, these areas that have healthier soil, that have cover, are able to handle that water that's coming down hard. And the places that are bare or that have less soil health, it's just running right off along with the topsoil. Like with climate change, we have to farm a different way with better soil health that can handle these kinds of water extremes.
I just want to add one more thing real quickly. The rhizosheaths that you were talking about, and I was smiling about, and I remember the look on your face. The dirt, yeah. This is something that happens on plants often in sandier soils during drought conditions, and the plant has this unique way of communicating with the microbes to create this shield around the root system, which will help it defend itself against drought. I had never seen rhizosheaths in my 35 years of farming on my farm until we started doing regenerative practices.
Hi. So in 2022, the USDA did its last ag census. And calculating the cost of production in Massachusetts, the average farmer makes about 94.8 cents for every dollar they spend. So they're, and that's not, there's tiers for how big the farm is and how much, but overall, that's what we're looking at. So as we go through this process of moving farmers toward regenerative agriculture, there's got to be an economic story we tell as well. So as you're going through this, things like What are going to be the initial yield losses as you make that transition? How many extra hours of manual labor are you going to need? The cost of different production. I mean, and we don't. None of us pay the full cost of production for anything that we're doing, for our driving here, for the food we're eating. But the farmers are already operating at a loss. So how do we get them to that next step? How do we get them through that transition? And back to one of the things that we've been talking about, a lot of this is really easy if we eat locally. And that is not just eating locally when it's in season, but understanding what local is year-round for our communities. Because we all love our tomatoes or our beef, wherever it comes from, but we can't continue on that pathway if we're going to move to a regenerative system, or we have to move away from that pathway.
Thank you. I think that economic question is really, really important. And, we're a nonprofit. We're able to accept philanthropy, and that helps make all of this work possible. For-profit farms don't tend to do that. And I think an important thing for us all to think about is how much we already subsidize agriculture in this country. We spend billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money supporting agricultural systems through our farm bill that are actually really detrimental to human health and to the environment. It's not that we're not already paying for it. We're just not paying for the right things. So if those funds could be redirected to support farmers to grow food that people will eat, food that people will eat in their area, and to make a transition to regenerative practices so that we all have food security in the future. That is something we can all be advocates for and speak up to our policymakers and tell them that this matters to us and that we want federal dollars and state dollars to be redirected to support local agriculture and regenerative agriculture, because we need to actually make public investments in this transition, and we don't have time to waste on this. So I think it's a good moment for political advocacy on this too.
I'd like to ask how much urine you're incorporating into your farm, because are you doing something like with Rich Earth and collecting urine from people on the vineyard? Because as you probably know, I mean, the Cape has a horrible problem with estuary, death in the estuaries. And using urine in farming as well as on whatever lawn or whatever land anybody has would make an enormous difference. And I'm hoping you're incorporating pee.
That's a great question. That's not happening yet on the vineyard. Urine diversion is something that people are talking a lot about. Sakiko, I think, is here somewhere. Yes, there's Sakiko, who's here from the Martha's Vineyard Commission, our regional planning agency, and they've been helping drive conversations about how we can do more urine diversion on the island. Nitrogen pollution is a huge issue in our waterways on the island too. It seems like there's a lot of potential around this and some infrastructure that needs to be created. So I know there have been conversations across the Sound trying to learn from what's happening over on this side to help inform what's happening on the island. I don't know if you know any more about it, Andrew.
The only thing I'll add is that I think it's just one of the craziest things that we do as human beings. I mean, think of all the nutrients that are leaving California, come to New England, we consume it, and then we put it into our groundwater and pollute it. So I'm hopeful that this will, in my lifetime, I'll see change.
Let's go one more question.
I haven't heard anything about pests. What do you do about that? Because I know that's one of the problems with the huge the huge farms out west that are like all one crop and one pest could ruin it.
Well, I guess I should answer that. When we started this project, like I said, we didn't really know where we were going with it. I wish we had had sort of baseline data. We are seeing less pest and disease pressure on our farm. And like I said, we don't have the data to prove it, but anecdotally, I would say it's a given. Healthier plants have the means to thwart insect damage. Anybody who has a really healthy garden knows that they have less loss than maybe someone who doesn't take good care of their garden. So it's something that if we were ever to enter a partnership with Wells, looking at pest issues and disease issues impacts is really important. And that's worth money to a farmer. So if you can get through the hardship of transitioning your farm, the other side is really beautiful. I can say that. And I have almost been in tears at times when I walk out in these fields now, because I knew it before and now I know it now. And it's two different worlds.
One of your solutions is to grow a diverse array of crops in amongst other cover crops. So you're not in the situation where you've got, acres and acres and acres of one thing at one time, right? Is that
correct? We have a
lot
of we have natural predators probably on the farm. We have a lot of different habitats mixed throughout the farm. I believe that we have a balancing thing going on this farm, and we have birds like you wouldn't believe on this farm. I mean, we are the hot spot in Vineyard Haven on Martha's Vineyard. And so there's a lot more to this story, but it will probably take a few years to really understand it better.
I think that's a fantastic place to end. And just we can all picture this magnificent farm, and it's not just about growing the magnificent food, but it's for the community, it's for the biodiversity, it's for all of us, and we can think about how we can incorporate some of that into our own homes and gardens and communities and so on, and see where this thing goes. So join me in thanking Andrew, Noel, and Chris for this conversation. See you next month.